I was standing in my driveway, hands covered in motor oil from fixing my truck, when I saw her marching across the street like she owned the entire neighborhood. Brenda Patterson, the 48-year-old HOA president with her signature blonde bob and perpetual scowl, was clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon of mass destruction. I had lived in this peaceful Sacramento suburb for 3 years without incident, but ever since Brenda took over the HOA 6 months ago, my life had become a bureaucratic nightmare. "Lucas Rodriguez!" she shrieked from the sidewalk, her voice carrying that particular pitch that made dogs howl 3 blocks away. "I'm citing you for unauthorized vehicle maintenance in a visible area. This is your 4th violation this month." I straightened up, wiping my hands on a rag. "Brenda, I'm changing my oil in my own driveway. There's nothing in the HOA bylaws that prohibits basic vehicle maintenance." Her face flushed red, clashing spectacularly with her hot pink polo shirt. Section 12, subsection B clearly states that no commercial or industrial activities are permitted on residential properties. "This isn't commercial activity. I'm working on my own truck." I kept my voice level, though my patience was wearing thin. This was just the latest in a series of increasingly absurd complaints she had filed against me. "I'll be reporting this to the board and you'll be fined $250. She scribbled furiously on her clipboard. "And your grass is 3/4 of an inch too long. That's another $100 fine." I glanced at my lawn, which I had mowed just 2 days ago. It looked identical to every other lawn on the block. "You measured my grass?" "I measure everything, Mr. Rodriguez. Someone has to maintain standards in this community." She sniffed and turned on her heel, marching back to her house directly across the street where she could monitor my every move from her front window. This had been my life since February. Brenda had started her campaign against me after I had the audacity to vote against her proposal to increase HOA fees by 60%. She wanted to install decorative street lamps that nobody asked for, and I had rallied several neighbors to oppose it. The measure failed by 2 votes, and Brenda had made it her personal mission to make me pay. The fines started small. My trash cans were visible from the street for 45 minutes past the pickup time. My holiday lights stayed up 3 days into January. My car was parked 6 inches over the property line. Each violation came with a fine and a lecture, delivered in that grating voice that could strip paint off walls. I went inside and called my neighbor, Tom Chen, who lived 4 houses down. Tom had dealt with Brenda's wrath last year when he painted his front door navy blue instead of the approved slate blue. "She got you again?" Tom laughed when I told him about the latest fines. "Man, she's obsessed with you. I thought I had it bad." "I'm keeping records of everything," I said, pulling out the folder where I had been documenting each interaction. "There's got to be something I can do. This is harassment." "Good luck with that. She's untouchable as long as she's HOA president. My advice? Keep your head down and wait for the next election." But keeping my head down wasn't my style, and Brenda wasn't planning to ease up. The next day, I received a certified letter informing me that I was being fined $500 for aggressive landscaping. Apparently, the rose bushes I had planted along my front walkway were too vibrant and distracting and violated the community's aesthetic guidelines. I had purchased those roses from the same nursery where half the neighborhood bought their plants. They were standard red roses, nothing exotic or unusual. I took photos, printed out the relevant HOA bylaws, and prepared to contest the fine at the next board meeting. The meeting was held on a Thursday evening in the community center, a bland beige building that smelled like old coffee and disappointment. About 20 homeowners showed up, most of them looking as thrilled to be there as I felt. Brenda sat at the head table with the other board members, Gary Morton, a retired accountant who spent most meetings playing solitaire on his phone, and Susan Yates, a timid woman who agreed with everything Brenda said. I waited through 40 minutes of tedious discussion about pool regulations and parking permits before the floor opened for homeowner concerns. I stood and approached the microphone set up in the center aisle. I'm here to contest several recent fines I've received," I began, holding up my documentation. "I believe these citations are not only invalid under our current bylaws, but represent a pattern of targeted harassment." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Rodriguez, if you would simply follow the rules, you wouldn't receive fines." "I've reviewed the rules extensively." I held up the printed bylaws. Section 18 regarding landscaping states that homeowners may plant any non-invasive species in their front yards, provided they maintain them properly. My roses meet all criteria. I have photos here showing identical plants in other yards that haven't been cited. Those roses are red, Brenda said, as if that explained everything. Red roses are not prohibited anywhere in our governing documents. They're too red. The absurdity of the statement hung in the air. A few homeowners shifted uncomfortably. Gary looked up from his phone for the first time all evening. Brenda, Gary said slowly. I don't think we can fine people for roses being too red. Brenda's face contorted. As HOA president, I have the authority to make judgment calls about community aesthetics. If Mr. Rodriguez doesn't like it, he can move. That's not how this works, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I'm formally requesting that all my fines from the past 3 months be reviewed and dismissed. I'm also requesting that future citations against my property be approved by the full board, not unilaterally issued by the president. Denied! Brenda slammed her hand on the table. This meeting is adjourned. You can't just adjourn because you don't like what someone is saying, I protested. But Brenda was already gathering her papers, and Gary and Susan followed her lead like dutiful puppets. I left the meeting furious, with a stack of unresolved fines and the sinking feeling that this situation was going to get worse before it got better. I was right. Over the next 2 weeks, I received violation notices for my mailbox being the wrong shade of black, my front door wreath being too large, and my porch light being too bright. Each citation came with increasing fines. When I ignored them, Brenda sent a letter threatening to place a lien on my property if I didn't pay the accumulated $4,000 in penalties, $4,000 for completely made-up violations. I consulted with a lawyer friend, Marcus Williams, who practiced real estate law in downtown Sacramento. This is excessive, Marcus agreed, reviewing my documentation in his office overlooking the Capitol building. But fighting an HOA is tricky. They have broad powers under California law, and proving harassment requires a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior. I have the pattern, I said, spreading out months of citations, emails, and photos. She doesn't cite anyone else for these same issues. Marcus studied the evidence. You've been thorough. I think you have a case for harassment. We could send her a cease and desist letter, maybe file a complaint with the state if it continues. Do it, I said. I'm not paying these bogus fines, and I'm not letting her bully me out of my own home. Marcus drafted a strongly worded letter outlining the harassment, citing specific instances where Brenda had violated her duties as HOA president, and demanding that all fines be rescinded and future violations be handled through proper board procedures. We sent it certified mail on a Monday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, I had a sheriff's deputy knocking on my door. Lucas Rodriguez? The deputy asked, holding a document. That's me. You're being served with a temporary restraining order. You need to stay at least 100 yards away from Brenda Patterson at all times. I stood there, stunned, as the deputy handed me the paperwork and explained the restrictions. According to the filing, I had been harassing Brenda for months, sending threatening communications, and had verbally accosted her outside her home. The petition claimed she feared for her safety and needed court protection. Every single allegation was a lie. This is insane, I said, reading through the document. I never threatened her. I sent one letter through my attorney addressing legitimate concerns. You'll have a chance to contest it at the hearing, the deputy said. That's scheduled for 2 weeks from today. Until then, you need to comply with the order. Brenda lived directly across the street from me. 100 yards meant I couldn't even walk out my front door without potentially violating the restraining order. I would have to access my house through the back alley and couldn't park in my own driveway. I called Marcus immediately. She filed a restraining order against me, complete fabrications. I just got the notification, Marcus said, his voice tight with anger. This is retaliation for the cease and desist. We're going to fight this hard, Lucas. This kind of abuse of the court system doesn't fly. I read through Brenda's petition more carefully that evening, my blood pressure rising with each paragraph. She claimed I had sent her dozens of threatening emails, though she provided no evidence. She said I had followed her to the grocery store and aggressively confronted her in the parking lot on a date when I had actually been in San Francisco for a work conference. She stated that I had shouted obscenities at her from my yard, loud enough that neighbors heard and that she lived in constant fear of what I might do next. The most infuriating part was that some of these alleged incidents supposedly occurred in front of witnesses, but she didn't name any. It was a masterclass in making accusations that would be difficult to definitively disprove while providing just enough detail to sound credible. I spent the next 2 weeks gathering my own evidence. I pulled credit card statements proving I was out of town during the alleged grocery store confrontation. I collected my email records showing I had never sent Brenda anything except responses to HOA business, all professionally worded. I got a written statement from Tom Chen confirming that he had never heard me yelling or acting aggressively. I even pulled the metadata from the cease and desist letter showing it came from Marcus's law office, not from me personally. The court hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning at the Sacramento County Superior Court. I arrived early with Marcus, both of us carrying briefcases full of documentation. Brenda showed up 20 minutes late, accompanied by a lawyer I didn't recognize, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he specialized in making people miserable. We were called into the courtroom, a small administrative hearing room rather than a full courtroom. The judge, Honorable Patricia Simmons, was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had a reputation for not tolerating BS. Brenda's attorney spoke first, painting a picture of me as an unstable neighbor who had become fixated on his client after a minor HOA dispute. He presented her written declaration, which expanded on the allegations in the original petition, adding new details about how frightened she felt and how this had affected her mental health. Then it was our turn. Marcus methodically dismantled every allegation. He presented the credit card statements for the grocery store incident. He showed the email logs proving I had sent no communications outside official HOA business. He introduced evidence that Brenda had issued me over 30 citations in 3 months while issuing only 5 to all other homeowners combined. Your Honor, Marcus said, this restraining order is not about safety. It's about retaliation. My client exercised his legal right to challenge improper HOA practices, and Ms. Patterson has abused the court system to punish him for it. She's weaponizing this court to harass my client and deprive him of the use of his own property. Judge Simmons listened carefully, reviewing the evidence. She turned to Brenda. Ms. Patterson, you claim Mr. Rodriguez sent you dozens of threatening emails. Where are they? Brenda's attorney jumped in. My client felt too threatened to save them, Your Honor. She deleted them for her own peace of mind. All of them? Judge Simmons raised an eyebrow. But she saved none as evidence before filing a court petition? She was too distressed to think clearly, the attorney said. And this confrontation at the grocery store. You have no witnesses? It happened in a deserted area of the parking lot. On a Saturday afternoon at a major supermarket, Judge Simmons looked skeptical. And none of these other alleged incidents have any witnesses either, despite occurring in a residential neighborhood? Brenda spoke up for the first time, her voice taking on that martyred tone. Your Honor, I'm a single woman living alone. I'm terrified of what this man might do. He's unstable and angry, and I just want to feel safe in my own home. Marcus leaned forward. Your Honor, Ms. Patterson lives directly across the street from my client. This restraining order makes it impossible for him to access his own home normally. If the court is concerned about proximity, perhaps Ms. Patterson should be the one to maintain distance, given that she's the one who feels threatened. Judge Simmons nodded slowly. I'm going to deny the restraining order. Ms. Patterson, I find insufficient evidence to support your claims. Mr. Rodriguez has provided substantial documentation contradicting your allegations. If you do have legitimate safety concerns, I suggest you contact law enforcement at the time of any incident and preserve evidence properly. This court will not be used as a weapon in a neighborhood dispute. The relief that washed over me was immense, but it was quickly replaced by anger. Brenda had tried to destroy my life with lies, and all she got was a denial? No consequences? Marcus must have seen it on my face. As we left the courtroom, he pulled me aside. This is where we go on offense. You've got grounds for a countersuit, abuse of process, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress. We can hit her where it hurts. Let's do it, I said. She needs to learn she can't treat people like this. We filed the countersuit the following week. The complaint was detailed and damning. outlining not just the false restraining order, but the entire pattern of harassment that preceded it. We sued Brenda individually for her actions and named the HOA as a co-defendant for failing to prevent her abuse of power. The lawsuit alleged abuse of process for filing a meritless restraining order in bad faith, defamation for the false statements she made in her court filings, and intentional infliction of emotional distress for the sustained campaign of harassment. We also added claims of breach of fiduciary duty against her role as HOA president and sought damages for the legal fees, lost work time, and emotional harm her actions had caused. We demanded $50,000 in compensatory damages and asked the court to consider punitive damages given the egregious nature of her conduct. The reaction from the neighborhood was swift. News of the lawsuit spread quickly, and I started getting calls and visits from neighbors who had their own Brenda horror stories. Tom Chen came by with a bottle of bourbon and a detailed account of her threatening to fine him $5,000 for not pressure washing his driveway often enough. A couple 3 houses down, Mike and Jennifer Foster, told me about Brenda trying to force them to remove their playground equipment because it was unsightly. "We've been too scared to fight back," Jennifer admitted. "She threatened to make our lives hell if we contested anything." "You should talk to my lawyer," I said. "The more evidence we have of her pattern of behavior, the stronger the case." By the end of the week, Marcus had statements from 8 different homeowners detailing Brenda's abusive behavior as HOA president. The picture that emerged was of someone who used her position as a personal fiefdom, punishing anyone who disagreed with her and making up rules on the spot to justify her actions. The HOA board held an emergency meeting, which I attended by video conference at Marcus's suggestion to avoid any accusations of violating a space where Brenda was present. Gary Morton, who usually went along with whatever Brenda wanted, looked genuinely concerned for once. "Brenda, this lawsuit is serious," Gary said. "The HOA's insurance might not cover this if they determine you were acting outside your authority." "I was protecting the community," Brenda insisted. "Lucas Rodriguez is a troublemaker who doesn't respect our rules. If you had any backbone, you would support me instead of cowering because he hired some lawyer." "He had legitimate grievances," Susan Yates said quietly, speaking up for the first time in anyone's memory. "I've been uncomfortable with some of the fines you've been issuing. They seem excessive." "Excessive?" Brenda's voice rose. "I'm the only one who cares about maintaining standards around here. Without me, this place would fall apart." "The lawsuit claims you've issued more violations in 6 months than the board issued in the previous 3 years combined," Gary said, reading from a document. "Is that accurate? Because I actually enforce the rules. Or because you're targeting people you don't like," I said through the video screen. "Like everyone in this room knows you targeted me." The meeting deteriorated from there. Brenda refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing, and it became clear that the board was splitting. Gary and Susan wanted to settle the lawsuit to protect the HOA's finances. Brenda wanted to fight it to the bitter end. The discovery phase of the lawsuit proved to be devastating for Brenda's position. Marcus issued subpoenas for all HOA records, and what we found went beyond simple harassment. Brenda had been using HOA funds inappropriately, reimbursing herself for community expenses that included personal purchases. She had paid herself an unauthorized salary of $1,500 per month, which was nowhere in the HOA governing documents. She had used HOA money to hire a private investigator to follow me, which explained how she knew some of my daily movements. The private investigator angle was particularly damning. When we deposed him, he admitted Brenda had hired him to dig up dirt on me that she could use to justify fines or other actions. He had followed me for 3 weeks, photographed my activities, and reported everything to Brenda. She had paid him $3,000 from the HOA's operating account, listing it as security consultation. Marcus filed an amended complaint adding fraud and embezzlement claims. "This just keeps getting better for our case and worse for her," he told me. "She's not just a petty tyrant, she's a criminal." The HOA's insurance company sent Brenda a letter denying coverage for the lawsuit, determining that her actions fell outside the scope of her duties as president. That meant she would be personally liable for any judgment. They also sent investigators to audit the HOA's books, which led to them discovering even more financial irregularities. By July, Brenda was drowning. The lawsuit was proceeding. The HOA had suspended her from her position as president pending investigation, and rumors were swirling that the district attorney's office was looking into potential criminal charges for embezzlement. She tried to make it go away. Her attorney reached out to Marcus with a settlement offer. She would resign from the HOA, pay back the money she had taken, and drop any future claims against me if I dismissed the lawsuit. Not even close, I told Marcus. She tried to ruin my life. She lied to a court. She stole money from the community. A quiet resignation isn't justice. Marcus smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Let's keep pushing. We went to mediation in August, a requirement before the case could go to trial. The mediator, a retired judge named Harold Brennan, listened to both sides present their cases over the course of 8 hours. Brenda's attorney tried to paint her as a dedicated volunteer who had made some mistakes in judgment, but had always acted with the community's best interests at heart. Marcus destroyed that narrative with precision. He walked the mediator through every piece of evidence: the targeted citations, the false restraining order, the embezzled funds, the private investigator, the statements from neighbors. He showed that Brenda's actions weren't mistakes, but a deliberate pattern of abuse spanning months. My client has spent over $20,000 in legal fees fighting these baseless attacks, Marcus said. He's lost sleep, missed work, and had his reputation damaged in his community. Ms. Patterson needs to be held fully accountable. Judge Brennan turned to Brenda's attorney. Counselor, I'll be frank. Your client's position is terrible. If this goes to trial, I think a jury would award significant damages. The false restraining order alone is going to make them angry, and the financial misconduct seals the deal. I strongly advise settlement. We broke for private caucuses. In our room, Marcus laid out the situation. They're going to come back with a higher offer. The question is what you want. Money, public vindication, her head on a plate. I want her to face consequences, I said. Real consequences. And I want to make sure she can never do this to anyone else. When we reconvened, Brenda's attorney offered $75,000 and a public apology. Marcus countered with $150,000 plus Brenda's permanent resignation from any HOA position, a formal admission of wrongdoing, and her cooperation with any criminal investigation. The negotiation went back and forth for another 3 hours. Brenda didn't want to admit wrongdoing, and her attorney knew that any admission could be used in a criminal case. But her financial situation was dire. Between the lawsuit, her legal fees, and the HOA demanding repayment of the embezzled funds, she was facing bankruptcy. We eventually settled on $125,000, payable over 2 years, with Brenda resigning permanently from the HOA board and agreeing to a stipulated judgment that included findings of fact about her harassment and financial misconduct. It wasn't a full admission of guilt, but it was close enough. If she missed any payment, the full judgment would become due immediately with additional penalties. The settlement was finalized in September. Brenda had to take out a loan against her house to make the first payment. The HOA separately sued her for the embezzled funds, and she ended up owing them another $38,000 once the full audit was complete. But the story didn't end there. In October, the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office filed criminal charges against Brenda for embezzlement and misappropriation of funds. The HOA's insurance company had forwarded their investigation results to law enforcement, and prosecutors determined there was sufficient evidence to pursue charges. I attended the arraignment, sitting in the back of the courtroom as Brenda stood before a judge and pleaded not guilty to 6 felony counts. She looked haggard, her signature blonde bob now streaked with gray, her face drawn. This was no longer about HOA politics or neighborhood disputes. This was about potential prison time. The criminal case moved slowly through the system, as these things do. Brenda's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutors were uninterested in being lenient. The case had garnered media attention after a local news station did a story about HOA abuse, and the DA's office wanted to send a message that this kind of conduct wouldn't be tolerated. Meanwhile, life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. Gary Morton took over as interim HOA president and immediately rescinded all of my outstanding fines. The board voted to implement new oversight procedures to prevent any future president from abusing their authority. Several controversial rules that Brenda had pushed through were repealed. Tom Chen organized a neighborhood barbecue in November, the first social event the community had held in over a year. People actually showed up, no longer afraid of being cited for some imaginary violation. There was a palpable sense of relief, like everyone had been holding their breath and could finally exhale. "You did us all a favor," Mike Foster told me, flipping burgers on his grill. "We should have stood up to her earlier, but everyone was too intimidated." "I just got tired of being pushed around," I said. "Nobody should have to live like that in their own home." Jennifer Foster raised her beer. "To Lucas, the man who took down the HOA tyrant." Everyone laughed and drank to that, but I knew it hadn't been easy or fun. Fighting back had cost me time, money, stress, and peace of mind. I had done it because I had no choice, because backing down would have meant accepting abuse as the price of living in my own house. The criminal trial finally happened in February of the following year, almost a year after this nightmare had started. I was called as a witness and testified about Brenda's pattern of harassment, the false restraining order, and how my attorney's investigation had uncovered her financial crimes. Brenda's defense was essentially that she had been overwhelmed by the responsibilities of being HOA president and had made some accounting errors. She claimed the private investigator was hired for legitimate security concerns and that any personal reimbursements were for items she had purchased for community use and simply forgot to get pre-approved. The prosecution brought receipts showing Brenda had reimbursed herself for wine, expensive dinners, spa treatments, and designer clothes, all categorized as community expenses. They showed that the unauthorized salary she paid herself was deposited monthly for 6 months before anyone noticed. They demonstrated that the private investigator's report was focused entirely on me, with no broader security assessment. The jury deliberated for 7 hours before returning guilty verdicts on 5 of the 6 counts. The judge scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later. I attended the sentencing hearing on a warm March afternoon. The courtroom was packed with neighbors, some supporting Brenda, most supporting the prosecution. The judge heard statements from both sides. Brenda's attorney asked for probation, emphasizing her lack of prior criminal history and her standing in the community. The prosecutor asked for prison time, arguing that Brenda had abused a position of trust and had shown no genuine remorse for her actions. I was allowed to give a victim impact statement. "Your Honor," I said, standing at the lectern, "Brenda Patterson made my life a nightmare for months. She weaponized her position to punish me for disagreeing with her. She lied to a court and tried to deprive me of my home and freedom. When that didn't work, I discovered she had been stealing from the community she claimed to serve. She hasn't taken responsibility for any of it. Every step of the way, she's blamed others or made excuses. I don't think she's learned anything, and I don't think she would act differently if given another chance." The judge listened carefully to all the arguments before rendering her decision. "Ms. Patterson, you held a position of trust in your community, and you violated that trust repeatedly and deliberately. Your conduct toward Mr. Rodriguez was harassment, pure and simple, and your attempt to use the court system to further that harassment is particularly troubling. Your financial crimes demonstrate a pattern of entitlement and disregard for the rules you claim to be enforcing. I'm sentencing you to 18 months in county jail with credit for time served, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You will also pay full restitution to the HOA and complete 200 hours of community service." Brenda's face crumbled. Her attorney immediately filed notice of appeal, but she was remanded into custody that day. I watched as the bailiff led her out of the courtroom in handcuffs, her designer handbag left behind on the defense table. Outside the courthouse, reporters wanted statements. I kept it brief. "I'm grateful for the justice system working as it should. No one should be able to abuse their power without consequences, whether it's an HOA president or anyone else." The civil settlement payments continued to arrive monthly. Brenda's house went up for sale, a foreclosure sign appearing on the lawn that she had once obsessed over keeping perfectly manicured. She served 14 months of her sentence before being released on good behavior, moving in with relatives somewhere in Nevada, according to neighborhood gossip. The HOA thrived under new leadership. Gary Morton proved to be a competent and fair president once freed from Brenda's influence. The community actually started feeling like a community, with people talking to each other without fear, organizing events and handling disputes like reasonable adults. I got my life back. The stress faded, though I'll admit I developed something of an allergic reaction to HOA politics. When the board asked if I wanted to run for a position, I politely declined. I had done my civic duty by standing up to corruption, but I had no desire to spend my evenings debating lawn maintenance schedules. Tom Chen did join the board, bringing a voice of reason and someone who remembered what had happened when power went unchecked. The board implemented term limits and financial oversight procedures that should prevent any future Brenda situations. As for me, I got back to living my life. I fixed my truck in the driveway whenever it needed fixing. I kept my roses red and vibrant. I mowed my lawn when it needed mowing, without measuring the exact height of each blade of grass. I lived in my home without fear of arbitrary fines or retaliation, which shouldn't have been remarkable but felt like a hard-won victory. People ask me sometimes if it was worth it, fighting back the way I did. They point out the legal fees, the stress, the time consumed by depositions and court hearings. They suggest that maybe moving would have been easier. But it wasn't about easy. It was about principle. It was about refusing to be bullied in my own home. It was about standing up not just for myself, but for every neighbor who had been too intimidated to fight back. It was about proving that even someone with a little bit of power can't abuse it without consequences. The neighborhood kids sometimes ride their bikes past Brenda's old house, now owned by a nice family from Portland who put in a vegetable garden and painted the front door a cheerful yellow. They don't know the history, don't know about the woman who once ruled this street like a petty dictator. That's probably for the best. Some of the older neighbors still talk about it, though usually in hushed tones, like speaking her name too loudly might summon her back. But mostly, people have moved on. Life goes on. The houses stand in their neat rows, the lawns grow and get mowed, the seasons change. I still have the folder of documentation, hundreds of pages of evidence that I'll probably never need again, but can't quite bring myself to throw away. It's a reminder of what happens when someone decides they're above accountability, and what can happen when someone decides to fight back. The last payment from Brenda arrived in November, right on schedule. $125,000, paid over 2 years in monthly installments, plus all the money she had to repay the HOA, plus her legal fees, plus the cost of her criminal defense. Her crusade against me over some imaginary HOA violations ended up costing her everything. Her position, her reputation, her freedom for a time, her home, and her financial security. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had just paid those first few fines, kept my head down, and let her win. The neighborhood would still be living under her regime of petty tyranny. She would have grown bolder, the fines more excessive, the harassment more severe. Someone else would have been her target, or maybe she would have just squeezed everyone slowly, boiling the frog so gradually that no one realized they were being cooked until it was too late. Marcus and I still grab lunch occasionally. He tells war stories from other cases, and I'm always amazed at how many of them involve HOAs gone wrong. It's apparently a whole subset of real estate law, dealing with neighborhood associations that forget they exist to serve homeowners, not rule over them. You were one of the lucky ones, Marcus told me over Thai food last month. Most people either can't afford to fight back or don't have the documentation you had. Brenda picked the wrong target. Maybe she did. Or maybe she had gotten away with it for so long that she thought she was invincible. That's the thing about bullies, whether they're on a playground or running an HOA. They keep pushing until someone pushes back, and they're never prepared for the resistance because they have internalized the idea that they're untouchable. The roses I planted are still thriving, by the way. They bloom every spring in brilliant red. Too red according to Brenda's standards, but absolutely perfect according to everyone else. I sometimes water them in the evening and think about how something as simple as planting flowers became a symbol of resistance against arbitrary authority. Life has a way of settling into patterns. I work my job as a mechanical engineer. I maintain my house without fear of violation notices. I wave to neighbors who wave back without looking over their shoulders nervously. The extraordinary becomes ordinary again, which is exactly as it should be. But I did learn something valuable from the whole experience. Communities are only as good as the people who lead them, and accountability isn't automatic. It requires people willing to stand up, ask questions, demand answers, and refuse to accept abuse disguised as authority. The neighborhood holds elections for the HOA board every year now. There's actual competition for the positions, and people pay attention to who they're voting for. Gary Morton ran on a platform of boring competence and won overwhelmingly. No one wants drama. We all just want to live in our homes without someone measuring our grass or counting the days our Christmas lights stay up. I ran into Susan Yates at the grocery store a few months ago. She had never been a friend of mine, having gone along with Brenda's schemes for months before finally finding her spine. But she stopped me in the produce section and apologized. "I should have said something earlier," she admitted, clutching a bunch of kale. "I knew what she was doing was wrong, but I convinced myself it wasn't my business. I'm sorry you had to deal with all that." "You did speak up eventually," I said. "That took courage." "Not enough courage and way too late," she replied, "but I learned from it. I'm not going to be a bystander anymore when I see something wrong." That conversation stuck with me. How many Susans are out there in neighborhoods across America, watching HOA boards abuse their power but staying silent because it's easier, because they're not the ones being targeted, because speaking up feels too risky? And how many situations could be prevented if more people found their courage earlier? I don't have answers to those questions. I just know that when it was my turn, when I was the one being targeted, I fought back, and I won. Not just in court or in the financial settlement, but in the more important sense of reclaiming my peace, my home, and my dignity. The restraining order Brenda filed against me was dismissed, her lies exposed for what they were. My countersuit cost her everything, exactly as the old saying goes about karma. The justice system worked, slowly and expensively, but it worked. The HOA was reformed. The neighborhood healed. And I'm still here, in my house on Maple Street in Sacramento, California, living my life without having to measure my grass or hide my truck maintenance or apologize for the color of my roses. It's a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it's mine. And it matters. That's really what this whole story comes down to. Small victories matter. Standing up matters. Refusing to be pushed around matters, not for some grand principle or political statement, but for the simple human dignity of being able to live in your own home without fear. Brenda Patterson learned that lesson the hard way. She discovered that even in the petty world of homeowners associations, there are lines you can't cross, rules that apply to everyone, and consequences for those who think they're above it all. Her restraining order failed. My countersuit succeeded. Justice, in the end, prevailed. And somewhere in Nevada, she's probably living in a small apartment, making payments on debts that will take years to clear, carrying the weight of a criminal record and a reputation destroyed by her own actions. I don't take pleasure in her suffering, but I don't regret my role in holding her accountable either. The sun sets over Sacramento on another ordinary evening. I'm in my driveway again, hands dirty with motor oil, fixing my truck because that's what I do. My grass is exactly as long as I feel like keeping it. My roses bloom in defiant red. And across the street where Brenda once maintained her surveillance post, the curtains are drawn and peaceful. I wouldn't change a thing about how I handled the situation. Well, maybe I would have documented even more, started even earlier, been even more prepared. But the outcome? The outcome was exactly what it needed to be. A bully was stopped. A community was freed. And I'm still here, still standing, still living my life on my own terms. That's the real victory, the one that matters more than any court judgment or financial settlement, the victory of not backing down, not giving in, not accepting that someone else gets to control your life because they have a clipboard and a title, the victory of proving that ordinary people can fight back against petty tyrants and win. So yeah, Brenda Patterson filed a restraining order against me. And yeah, my countersuit cost her everything. But more importantly, it gave me back everything she tried to take. My home, my peace, my freedom to live without harassment or fear. And in the end, that's the only thing that really matters. Everything else is just details, paperwork, and legal fees. The substance is simple. I won. She lost, justice was served. The story has reached its conclusion, but life goes on. The HOA continues to function better now than it ever did under Brenda's reign. The neighborhood thrives, and I continue to be just another homeowner in suburban Sacramento, going about my daily life, bothering no one, being bothered by no one. Exactly as it should be, exactly as it always should have been. And thanks to standing up when it mattered, exactly as it will be for years to come. That's my story. That's how an HOA Karren filed a restraining order against me, and how my countersuit cost her everything. Not because I was looking for revenge, but because I refused to be victimized, and because the system, when properly engaged, actually can work to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. The whole experience changed me in subtle ways. I'm more aware of local politics now, more engaged with community issues, more willing to speak up when something seems wrong. But I'm also more appreciative of ordinary peace, of being able to simply exist without conflict. My friends joke that I should write a book about the experience, maybe start a consulting business, helping other homeowners fight abusive HOAs. I usually laugh it off, but there's a part of me that thinks about all the people out there facing similar situations, dealing with their own Brendas, wondering if fighting back is worth it. To them, I would say this: document everything, know your rights, don't back down from bullies, and remember that HOAs have power, but not unlimited power. There are laws, procedures, and courts that exist precisely to prevent the kind of abuse I experienced. Use them, fight back, stand up. Because at the end of the day, your home is supposed to be your sanctuary, not a battleground. And no one with a clipboard and a superiority complex should be able to take that away from you. The final chapter of this saga closed when I received a formal letter from the HOA's attorney confirming that all liens, fines, and pending actions against my property had been cleared. My record with the association was clean, as if Brenda's reign of terror had never happened. Bureaucratically, I'd been made whole. Emotionally, it took longer. The stress of months of conflict doesn't disappear overnight. But gradually, I found myself relaxing again, not tensing up every time I saw someone approaching my house, not checking my mailbox with dread, not documenting every interaction just in case I needed evidence later. Normal became normal again. And that, more than any legal victory or financial settlement, is what I had been fighting for all along. The right to be ordinary, to live quietly, to have my biggest concern be whether I needed to pick up milk at the store rather than whether some HOA tyrant was going to invent a new reason to find me. As I finish working on my truck and clean up my tools, I look around at the neighborhood that almost broke me, but ultimately made me stronger. The houses standing in the twilight, the lawns and gardens tended by people who just want to live their lives, the community that survived its brush with petty tyranny and came out better for it. Brenda Patterson filed a restraining order against me, thinking it would be the final blow that drove me out of the neighborhood or forced me into submission. Instead, it became the catalyst for her downfall. My countersuit didn't just cost her money, it cost her everything she had built her identity around: her power, her position, her reputation, her freedom. And me? I got my life back. I got justice. I got vindication. And I got to keep my house, my roses, and my dignity intact. In the calculus of winners and losers, there's no question how this story ended. The lights come on in houses up and down the street as evening settles in. Families gathering for dinner, people settling in for the night, the ordinary rhythms of suburban life playing out the way they have for decades and hopefully will for decades more. No drama, no conflict, no HOA president on a power trip making everyone miserable. Just peace, just normal, just life as it should be. And having fought so hard to preserve it, I'll never take it for granted again.